on here.
Got it.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So Giles and I are going to do a little bit of a chat about the blogs that we put up, because Giles is helping me with Ochre and he's my friend. And so we thought we would sort of like just do this little like fortnightly little chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To sort of, look a bit deeper into what it's all about.
Yeah. And hope that I know the answers when we look a bit deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, with this one, we wanted to talk a bit about behavior and personalities, and obviously different personality types. And there are various different personality types. We've all got our own unique ones. Are there like specific personality types? Is there a range of personality types that you would like start to look at when you're for example, if you're doing a profile of someone?
Well, yeah.
Would you end up pigeonholing people into certain personality types?
No, so it's profiling I'll come back to, but if you're using personality types, there are some that put people into little buckets and they'll say, this is your trait, this is your trait. The most broadly used, like loads of the very good ones are built on it, it's called 5-factor. And basically you sit somewhere on each of one of 5 scales. And that's the one we've used in Ochre. And when we're doing profiling, what we would do is we interview someone about a life biographically, so from when they're a teenager up to where they are today. Then they do the psychometrics. So we do about 2 hours, 3 hours interviewing, then they do psychometrics. And then we go over those psychometrics with them and say, well, given you said you like to spend loads of time around people and blah, 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 but actually that's interesting because this comes out with you saying you're an introvert. How does that marry? What does that mean? And so it's not a way of saying you are that. It's a way of saying, well, this is what you've written down. So let's explore what that means and how that all fits together. And it should never, I get really upset because I have seen it used to typecast people, to assess people, which you're not meant to do with personality tests and all those sorts of things. It really should be used for exploration and development.
So as a psychologist, there's something I think you'll probably be able to explain called personality theory, which you use to define and explain behavior. So can you explain a bit about what personality theory is?
You're smiling like it's going to trying to find things that are going to trip me up. So personality theory, well, basically, we all have our own little framework in our head of how we all sort of look and predict someone's behavior. So if someone starts behaving in a way that we're not used to, we'd be like, so if, for example, you have a friend who's quite quiet and they like sitting and watching people, and then you go to a party and they're literally standing on the bar, like dancing, you'd be like, hang on a minute, what is going on there? That is not what I would have expected of them. So we all have these little frameworks in our mind where we predict other people's behavior. But what personality theory does is it does that more reliably. So it takes away some of the bias and it looks at it from a more theoretical framework, which doesn't really explain what personality theory is. But basically, it'll be certain behaviors and certain ways of being are common across people. So the thing of introversion and extroversion, we all have more introverted traits, more extroverted traits. We all respond in different ways, but we kind of have those things to more or less reliably in terms of how we behave. So if we behave as someone who is reflective and observational of the world in one situation, we're probably going to behave like that in another. We might not. But then there are other things about us that personality measures don't look at. So they're only looking at a tiny fraction of behavior. But people can get upset because they're like, well, that makes me like one of everyone else, because you're looking at me through this lens of measurement. It's not. It's taking the aspects of behavior that it's easiest for us to predict, and that has been like rigorously tested across different populations, and then the psychometrics or personality tests or quizzes, it's nicer to say, are put together.
Okay, that's really interesting, actually. So yeah, because I guess you get into sort of typecasting people, and yeah, I mean, we all do that a little bit to people, don't we? Sort of just, even like if you're people watching, you look at certain people, the way they're behaving, and you sort of typecast them.
Yeah, and we don't often realize we're doing it, but we do do it. And then that's where it becomes problematic, because if it's used to hire someone and it's not a scientifically robust test, then it'll have all sorts of biases in, which can play against different people, whether they're sort of minorities or that they are disadvantaged in some sort of way by what it's saying.
It's so interesting. It's such a rich area, behavior.
I mean, it's massive. Like, people actually do, like, their whole careers they spend constructing psychometric tests, which I wouldn't advise, because whilst interesting when you're talking about it with people, it can very quickly become quite hard work. I'll put it that way. That's a nice way of putting it, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think anytime you're kind of looking at lots and lots of data as well.
Yeah. But again, it depends on your personality type.
Exactly. I was going to say that there was a certain personality for
exactly.
that.
Some people will thrive with that. So, it's not a case of it being good or bad. That's the thing as well. There isn't a good and bad. I think that's really important.
I was going to say, is there certain personality types that lead to kind of behavioral change? So, for example, are there certain people that are good at being leaders, certain people that are susceptible to personal growth? Are there, on the other flip side of that, people that are, I don't know, bad in relationships, bad at communication? Does that form within certain personality types?
Yeah, unfortunately it does, because when you're trying to match mentors, you want everyone to match someone, but they don't necessarily. So we've had to consider that in our algorithms. But if you take, like, if I start with the second one, so you said leadership, and then what was the other thing you said?
Personal growth.
Personal growth.
Some people might be particularly like aligned to that because of the way they are.
Yeah. So personal growth, there's a scale on the 5-factor called openness to experience, and it'd be called different things in different scales. But basically, there is a lot of research that shows people who have a higher level of openness to experience are they're more open to, more curious about the world, about themselves, about growth, than someone who's got a low score on that. And then when it comes to people being nicer or easier to get on with, there's ways of looking at it in combination, the different things. And there'll be some people that are a little bit prickly that have a score on certain areas where you're like, it doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means they might be more difficult to get on with. And low on openness to experience is one of those examples, because if you're low on that, you're less open to knowing what other people's viewpoint is and how they see the world. So, that can trip you up. But then it could be that someone does that from the perspective of just actually finding security in that, and they don't want to think negatively about other people. So there's all these nuances that kind of come into it. You can't say, like I just did, someone is just closed-minded. You have to say, well, what's the circumstance? Who are they? What does that mean to them? And how does that display itself? And your first question on leadership is really interesting, because when I work with leaders who are introverted, they have typically struggled at some point with the fact that they think they should be extroverted, because the charismatic leader sort of profile that is presented, particularly from the US, is of an extroverted leader. But actually, you can be charismatic and introverted. That's one thing. Another thing is that there was a test done by, or research done by Harvard Business Review. I think it was just at the turn of the century, where they looked at leaders across Fortune 500, and they said the introverted leaders were more likely to create positive, sustainable, transformational change within organizations, and were more successful over the longer term than the extroverted leaders. So there isn't a right or wrong, but there is I need to understand me and my strengths. And so when I'm working with an introverted leader, I'm not saying, oh, you need to become more extroverted. It's saying, right, how do we make the most of the way you do things and the way you see the world?
You think, I was just saying, like, about, you said about there's not a right or wrong, and I was thinking there is often a right or wrong perception, though, because,
oh yeah, God, there is,
because you would think, like, like with regards to like leadership and stuff, you would think of someone who's more charismatic or dynamic even, but actually, like you say, there's no real evidence that that's, there are obviously good charismatic leaders, but then there are the other side of things as well. And I suppose as someone who is an introvert, rather, you might not see yourself as having leadership qualities, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's quite problematic, actually. I think that probably stops quite a lot of people who are introverted from going into certain roles. So it's, for example, there's a common idea that you need to be extroverted in a sales role, but you don't. You can be an introvert, but if an introvert's looking at all the other extroverts and thinking they need to behave like them, they could struggle with it. Whereas if they talk to a successful salesperson who's an introvert and they work out which strategies work for them, they'll be like, okay. So in a way, it's like it's seeing someone like me in that role and understanding how I make the most of who I am.
Tricky to navigate all this, though, isn't it?
Oh yeah, people are tricky. That's why A, I haven't worked myself out yet, and B, despite a long time trying, B, I like psychology because there's always things to learn.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's human behavior is such a rich topic, and I think one that probably is generally misunderstood and something that probably we're all intrinsically interested in.
I agree. I mean, obviously, I'm going to, because I am really biased towards human behavior, and so I may see it through a slightly different lens. But I think people are interested in themselves, like, even if they're not like self-promoters or people want to know, oh, well, what makes me tick? What makes me me?
Yeah.
And we know that we thrive more if we're building on our strengths and understanding how to use those.
Yeah. And obviously the blog post is called "Are You Reliably You?" Are you reliably you?
Me? I hope so. I don't think I had this phase where this is probably nothing to do with personality, but I used to rock up to school in the morning and I used to be quite grumpy with some of the mums, not because I was grumpy with them, but just because it was first thing in the morning and I was rushing to get off to work. And then one day someone sort of hinted at the fact that I was like that, and I was like, oh my goodness, I don't want to be like that. But then I had to remind myself every day in the car before I went in, Fiona, switch on your sort of self where you actually engage with other people rather than going into my own world. And that's something that's really, really common with leaders. You kind of having to remind them almost how to be them sometimes, because that's not a personality thing. It's a mood thing, or it's a situational thing. So yeah, there's so am I reliably me? Generally, I hope so. I mean, the things that I know reliably me are I'm a loyal friend, I'm trustworthy. Yeah, those things. What else?
And lots more, incredibly smart and intelligent and well thought out and compassionate and kind and all those things as well. But it is hard sometimes to sort of look at those things within ourselves, isn't it? To actually, particularly like the more positive aspects of ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. People often don't understand their strengths, because to them, they'll be like, if you talk to someone about their strengths, they're like, yeah, but everyone does that. It's like, no, not everyone does do that. That's something that you do really well. Oh, but it would, I find it, that's just what I do. Yeah, you find it easy because it's something you're very good at naturally. But you can be even better at it if you sit and you think about how you can apply it to your life, and actually feel grateful that you're like that and appreciate that's part of who you are.
Yeah.
Which is obviously good for self-esteem and all those sorts of things as well. Says
Absolutely.
the person who can't name more than two.
I wasn't going to say anything.
Okay. So personality is massive. And I'm going to be writing more stuff on it because it is so massive. And so it's going to break down a little bit. But that gives you kind of like an overview, high level.
We've only sort of very, very gently touched the surface of it.
Whistle stop tour.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to hit with stop on that bit. Okay, was that all right? Was there anything we didn't really cover? Anything that you